Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Peter McCarthy, and I'm one of the 5-member coordinating committee member of CNY Solidarity. We're really happy to see this crowd here. Some of you just saw this on Facebook or got a referred from a friend or whatever, and we're glad you did. Please make sure, once again, that you've signed up for our weekly newsletter. That is our main means of staying in touch with people. We also have other social media. We now have Blue Sky, we do Facebook, and we try to alert the community to very important things. The newsletter, if you haven't seen it, comes out every Tuesday morning. It's got 3 main sections in it. First is action alerts. It says, call Schumer, call Mannion, say this, or donate to something, whatever. And we ask people to try to please take those very seriously. Second one is articles of the week. 3 to 6 articles every week from progressive or sometimes centrist sources that have information that we think is very timely and important. And thirdly, the events calendar. So for the coming several weeks, all kinds of events that have to do with progressive politics. So it's a good read. Please make sure you sign up and get it. So we will get to starting the agenda in just a moment. We'd like to start, as we try to do, with an acknowledgement that we are working here on the ancestral land of the Haudenosaunee. This was land that was taken. They never ceded it over. It was illegally taken with violence and threats and intimidation. And I'd like to just take a moment of silence to reflect on those who came before us. Thank you. Thank you. So we started right after Trump got elected the first time with the intention of saving the world from Trump. We were perhaps partially successful, but here we are again. Suddenly with a great deal of interest now in what we can do. Over the years, we have done marches, rallies, legislative visits, letters to the editor, a lot of phone calling. And a couple of weeks ago, one of our members said, things are going to get tough. We need to get ready for things to get more difficult. And so we wanted to get some good training in helping us be ready for really 2 kinds of things that we may be engaged in. One is active resistance to illegal policy. Taking actions that might or may not be illegal, but might lead to confrontations. Things like sit-ins, blocking, things like that. People may choose to do that. You don't have to do that if you're here. But we want people to be prepared to think about some of those kinds of things. The second type of activity is if we have marches or rallies that are not necessarily blocking or getting in everybody's way or in any way illegal, we might be confronted by people who are not happy with us and what we're doing. And we want to be ready to peacefully be able to respond to that. So over the next few sessions, if you choose to come back, we'll be covering a lot about that. We are fortunate to have 5 very experienced, I've met all these people over the years, and I am honored to be standing here with the 5 of them here. I'm going to turn it over to Andy Mager, who is going to take over for me.
Thank you very much, Peter. Is it easier if we stand when we're speaking? Yeah. So now let me introduce myself to start with. So I moved to Syracuse a little over 40 years ago because my partner at the time got a job at the Syracuse Peace Council. I was a young activist already engaged in nonviolent direct action and other forms of organizing. I've continued that work ever since, worked for many years and continue to work with the Syracuse Peace Council and I now coordinate Syracuse Cultural Workers, which is a publisher of products related to peace and social justice. So I came into this work as someone with significant privilege, a white man from an upper middle class background. And I was taught that I had agency, that what I thought, what I did could make a difference. And that made it a lot easier for me to take actions that challenged authority, that took some risks for myself. And so I think it's important, that context, for all of us to think about where we're situated. You got some handouts when you came in. I'm not going to go through them, but do take a look at them. And if you didn't get them on the way in, get them on the way out. So the Chinese character for crisis is broken down to both danger and opportunity. And in this current moment, I think a lot of us are feeling a great deal of danger, and we're not feeling so much like this is an opportunity, but that opportunity is there. The opportunity for things to change in a much more transformative way as people see what some people in this country really want, that they want a dictatorship that's focused on white supremacy, where everyone but wealthy white folks is cast off to the side. And hopefully many of our fellow citizens and folks who aren't citizens recognize that that's not the kind of world that we want to live in. So nonviolent direct action has been part of social movements since the beginning of time. Most of us know some of those examples. There were early Christians who refused to fight for the Romans. The Boston Tea Party was largely a nonviolent direct action. Right here in Syracuse, almost 175 years ago, people freed Jerry, who had been arrested as accused of being a fugitive slave, which was not the case at all. They burst into the jail and freed him and helped him make his way up to Canada to live in freedom. The women's suffrage movement engaged in nonviolent direct action. The Salt March led by Gandhi, sit-down strikes of auto workers, the Montgomery bus boycott, draft resistance and military resistors to stop the Vietnam War. And very recently, mass resistance of people in South Korea when their president declared martial law and sought to seize power. And they very quickly ended that attempted power grab. So we're here tonight to look at ways that direct action can play an important role in stopping the billionaire coup that is underway here in this country, and to move us back to pursuing the kind of country we want to create, right? We're hoping not to always be playing defense and trying to create things from getting worse, because before Trump was elected, things weren't so good, right? Want to offer a couple of definitions of things. So direct action is a kind of action that seeks to directly intervene in a situation, to try and stop it, to transform it. And that's in contrast to much of what we do. Pretty much all the things that Peter outlined were efforts that we appeal to decision makers, that we say, we write them letters, we protest at their offices, we say, we want you to act differently. So direct action complements that, but it's a bit different. So things like boycotts, sit-ins, tax refusal, war resistance, blocking entrances to buildings, occupations and strikes are some of the forms that direct action takes. Civil disobedience is another term that kind of weighs in here, and Peter referred to a little bit as well. And that involves breaking laws typically or other government regulations in order to seek social change. And generally such actions are public, and those of us participating in them openly face the consequences of our actions, whether that's arrest, prosecution, imprisonment, or other forms of consequences. And nonviolence can be seen by people either as sort of a fully engaged way of life, or a tactic, a tool that's used to try and create the changes that we seek. One of the folks who chose the former path of a life of nonviolence is a man named Wally Nelson, who's one of the many people who's been an important teacher to me. And I'm going to quote from Wally. He said, "Nonviolence is the constant awareness of the dignity and humanity of oneself and others. It seeks truth and justice. It renounces violence both in method and in attitude. It is a courageous acceptance of active love and goodwill as the instrument with which to overcome evil and transform both oneself and others. So, pretty intense commitment. And we don't all have to take that on, but there are some amongst us who do take on that level of commitment. Martin Luther King talked about nonviolent direct action as seeking to create a crisis and foster so much tension that a community that has refused to deal with an issue is forced to do so, that it can no longer be ignored. So that, again, is another piece of what we're talking about here. So all of these kinds of actions, nonviolent direct action, is based on a particular understanding of power. Most of us are taught that power comes from above, that someone with a gun, that a president, that a boss, that's where power comes from. But nonviolent direct action is based on the idea that power is in all of us, and that all of us have a power to choose to cooperate or not to cooperate with what other people are telling us to do. And that power of non-cooperation, particularly if we wield it collectively in large numbers, can transform things. Sometimes quickly, sometimes not so quickly. I've been involved in nonviolent direct action in a wide range of ways as part of other organizing work that I've done. And one of the handouts talks about sort of roles of nonviolent direct action. I think it's really important to see this as one of the tools that we use as part of organizing work. Not the only one, not necessarily the most important one, but an important one. So my first engagement with nonviolent direct action was in the late 1970s during the effort to stop nuclear power plants on Long Island initially, and then in New England. I then was subject to President Carter's call for a return to draft registration, which forced me to consider would I cooperate with being compelled to support the military and participate in it. I was involved along with Ellen in actions at various military bases here in upstate New York when there were nuclear weapons to the east of us at Griffiths Air Force Base and to the west of us at the Seneca Army Depot. I was involved in LGBT organizing. Ed and I were part of an affinity group that went down to Washington to protest the Supreme Court's Hardwick decision. I was part of anti-globalization work and climate justice work more recently. And that work, I believe, strengthens our social movements, it builds solidarity, and it inspires other people, as well as making important changes in our communities. A couple of specific stories to talk about. In the late 1980s, the first president, Mario Cuomo, sought to build a low-level radioactive waste dump in rural upstate New York. Portland County, where I was living at the time, was one of the targeted communities, and people rose up to oppose it and did all the kinds of things that people are doing here, but part of it was nonviolent direct action. And it was some of those nonviolent direct actions, not so much here, but in Allegheny County, in the western part of the state, that ultimately caused them to halt that process. And New York State has still never built such a facility. And many of the people who I worked with as part of that movement, I'm sure are people who voted for Donald Trump recently. So that was a way that things crossed some of those boundaries. So we certainly need to continue to look at those boundary crossing efforts. Last year, almost a year ago, I traveled down to Washington for Biden's State of the Union address and joined with hundreds of other people to block his path going from the White House to Congress to give him a message that the continued funding of genocide in Gaza was unacceptable and that we demanded that he stop supporting that both financially and diplomatically. And although we didn't make that change that we wanted him to make, we did actually delay the State of the Union address, and that was reported widely in the mainstream media. So I guess to close, I want to say that I encourage all of us to think about how we can push ourselves a little bit beyond our comfort zone. There's things that each of us feels is easy for us to do, and things that are a bit of a stretch. And I hope when you find that for yourself in whatever it is in your own way, that you'll feel some of the same deep empowerment that I've experienced when participating in Nonviolent Direct Action. So, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. It's really good to be here in Syracuse. I live in Ithaca, New York. My name is Ellen Grady, and I'm part of the Ithaca Catholic Worker Community and the newly formed Downtown Berrigan Collective, inspired by some Cornell students last spring who were they were part of the encampments and they discovered about Dan Berrigan. And if you don't know his story, he's originally from Syracuse. But there's some really great, they were inspired by him and the work that they did in resistance to the Vietnam War. And so we were inspired by the students. And anyway, thanks for inviting me. I was like, I don't know, what do I want to talk about? I feel like I was sort of born into a family that was trying to live as faithfully as they could to the gospel of nonviolence and love. And they showed up in many different ways. And my parents were very involved with the civil rights movement stuff and Black Power movement, as well as the anti-Vietnam War stuff. So my father was arrested in 1971 and facing 50-something years in prison for the action that they had done around destroying draft cards. And that's a whole long story, but it's really actually good for us to learn some of that history, because I think it was part of the movement to stop that war, that it took many, many different levels of citizens coming out and doing what they could. And I really loved what you said, Andy, of like, where's your comfort zone, and then can you push beyond it a little bit? Because I think right now, what we're facing right now, we need to do that. But I think even before that, we've needed to do that. And I love the quote from Howard Zinn, who said, civil disobedience is not our problem is civil obedience. And our acceptance of what the system tells us we're supposed to accept. And let me see, what was I going to say? That the resistance to, for a lack of a better word, is the empire of the United States. That is a long slog, it's long work. I feel like it's been the work of my whole adult life and probably my kid life too. But that we never do this by ourselves, and that it's about community. And so it's beautiful to see all of you guys here together and trying to figure out, how are we going to do this, right? How are we going to walk into these next 4 years together? Because it will be that some of us are going to push in a way in our lives that we're going to need the support of the other, right? And we're going to need each other. So making sure that we're building that community with each other is very, very, really important. Let me see, what else did I want to say? I think that in this process of looking at, Andy, you talked about that there's all these different levels. We can make phone calls, we can write letters, we can do this. We can do community organizing in terms of education about all the different issues that that need to be discussed, and it's a little mind spinning right now what's happening. But what did I want to say? But this question of nonviolent civil disobedience is what we have on the table tonight. And so I've been inspired by many different kinds of witnesses and been part of many different kinds of witnesses, from very small kinds of actions to really large scale. The first time, wasn't the first time I was arrested, but it was the first time in 1982 at the U.S. mission to the UN, when they were there were 500 of us arrested in the city around the whole issue of nuclear weapons, and it was an inspiring thing. We organized in such an amazing way, all these different hubs organized, and I don't know how it happened, but it seemed miraculous to me. And then I've been part of very, very small actions, and I don't think, how do I want to say this? Sometimes you're going towards effective, and sometimes you're going towards faithful. And so for me, it is, I consider what I do as part of a faith-based nonviolent direct action. I'm very informed by the gospel of love and this thing of loving our neighbor, and that is how we love God, is when we love our neighbor. So what did I want to say? So one of the stories that has always inspired me was this man named Ben Salmon, who during World War I in Colorado refused to serve in the military, and he was the only one. There was a bunch of people who refused to serve, but he was the only one that sort of cited his Catholic faith for the reason for resisting. And he'd come from sort of a very he'd been part of the strikes that had happened out in Colorado around the mining, but he didn't have like a big organizing background or anything, but when he went on trial, they sentenced him to death, and eventually that was commuted, his sentence. But not a lot of people heard about his story, and not a lot of people knew what was happening, and he was actually kind of vilified by his community as being a coward. Even his church was like, you might be citing Jesus as the reason. Oh, I had 2 minutes left. Holy cow! I thought, how am I going to fill up this time? And, anyway, Ben Salmon, look him up. He's really a very moving story. But it was a solitary witness. And then, as I said, there's this witness of 500 people. Thousands of people getting arrested at the School of the Americas, which many people here in this community have been part of those. And I think what I want to say is, for me, the process is having community to process what you're going to do, making sure you have the support around you, and not to. I have to go to court on Wednesday. I was part of an action at the federal building on November 15th around the issue of Gaza and to stop funding. We're spending another $20 billion in weapons. And so there was a vote coming up. I was arrested, and they gave me, they only arrested me. And I got an $80 ticket, or I could go to court. And I thought to myself, I have to go to the federal court, and I thought to myself, I want to bring the voice of Hind Rajab into that courtroom, into this federal courtroom, this federal system that allowed for the massacre of all these children. And I hate going to court, and but I'm challenged. I'm pushing beyond my comfort zone, and I think the court witness is a really important thing if you can do it. And welcome you to come and be there on Wednesday if you can at 10 o'clock. But and then the jail witness, and I've been to jail several times, and it's really a powerful thing. And I'm past my time, so I'm going to stop talking now. But we can talk about it later.
Okay, a little nervous. There's no way I'm going to be able to fit in what I want to fit in 10 minutes, but here's the attempt. So my name is Aly Wane. I'm an immigration activist and organizer, undocumented, still undocumented and unafraid, still speaking out. I don't care who they bring it out. I don't care who they bring it out. So this governance that was based on the genocide of the native people and the importation of African slaves does not have the moral legitimacy to tell us who is legal and who isn't. So I just always want to start with that. So first of all, I do want to thank, the folks who invited me and everyone on this, I mean, not just on this panel, there are several people in this room that I see who have genuinely been some of my role models and inspirations, people who have been doing this work longer than I have, and I have been doing it for a little over, 22 years, something like that, and it's starting to, take its toll a little bit. The power of nonviolence is certainly the power of community. And one of the things that's so great about actually being here tonight is I just realized that it's been 13 years, close to 13 years, it's gonna be 13 years in the summer, I think, since I sort of publicly came out as an undocumented activist, as a part of a whole group of undocumented activists across the country back in 2012. We were just coming out and sharing our story, and it was obviously a gamble. The idea was there are so many of us that if we all simply start to come out and share our stories, that they're not going to be able to come after all of us. It was a full gamble. I remember having a conversation with my closest friend, who was an immigration lawyer at the time. The week before I came out and I did the press conference, he was just like, as a lawyer, let me tell you, this is not a good idea. So, I was just like, I know, it's, you don't need to, scare me like that. But the point is, I did come out, and believe me, it was, I was scared, but it was easily the best decision that I've made in my life. In terms of the pressure that I felt before versus the pressure that I felt after, completely different. Before then, I was just constantly afraid of ICE and CBP. And afterwards, and this is once again connected to this conversation about nonviolence, because of the power of the community and because of the power of this community, I'm still here. And the bottom line is, there is a piece of me that knows and understands that if it weren't for that community support, I would have been deported a while back. So part of the power of nonviolence is certainly the power of community. We don't have the guns, but we have the people. And people power is still incredibly powerful. And this actually leads to kind of what I want to share about this particular moment, which is that, I think one of the things that has frustrated me about the response to Trump's sort of second turn in office is, people just being like, oh my God, there's no way we can overcome this brutal dictator. He's so overwhelming. And one of the things that really frustrates me, and I promise you I'm not going to be spending too much time dunking on the Democrats, but what's been really frustrating me about the Democratic Party is that they're so focused on legislative work that now they're acting as if, well, I guess since we can't pass laws, I guess there's nothing we can do. And what I'm here to tell you is, as an undocumented activist, I'm part of a community of people, we can't even vote, and some of the most privileged of us are still trying to legalize. I'm in a long legalization process. I actually received my approval for my green card in 2020. And as of now, because of all of the delays and the backlogs, I have to wait until 2027 in order to even get my green card privileges. And then that's 5 years to become a citizen. And I want to be clear, I am privileged within the undocumented community because I have a legal pathway. A lot of undocumented people who were brought here illegally, I was brought here legally as a child, don't even have even this long path. So that sort of gives you that sense of how long kind of and insane the process is. But the point is, I remember in 2016 and same in 2024, of course I was, deflated by Trump's, first and then second election. But I remember within that week, I was talking to other undocumented activists and like almost unanimously, especially the folks that have been doing it for a while, they were like, all right, well, it's time to hit the streets. There wasn't this sense of just kind of like, well, there's nothing we can do, which legislator can we call? Or no, there was just this sense of like, we've never been able to take this democracy for granted in the first place. We've always assumed that it takes work and that it takes effort in order to keep this democracy thriving. We've always believed that there was a possibility of the moment that we are in right now, where we have an administration that is completely insane and that would be willing to take away these institutions that so many people rely on. And from the undocumented community, what I can tell you is that these institutions don't mean anything unless people are willing to fight for them. And within the immigration space, one of the reasons why so many immigration organizers, for example, were ready for this in many ways, were preparing for this, is that unfortunately, because of how bad immigration politics are, every good immigration organizer that I know was basically saying, whether we get Harris or whether we get Trump, we understand that we're going to have an increase in immigrant incarceration and deportation. That's how far to the right the Dems, are right now. This is actually why when 46 of them voted for the Lake and Riley Act, including our good friend John Mannion here locally, and 12 in the Senate voted for the Lake and Riley Act, which is a deeply anti-immigrant bill. Very few people that I know and I trust were surprised. Everyone was just like, yeah, that's where the party is right now. But all that is not to give you a sense of futility, rather to give you a sense that everything that we have gotten within the immigration space, everything has been a result of concerted effort and pressure on the Democratic Party. Most of the organizing that I've done has been focused on the Democrats, hasn't been focused on the Republicans. Right now, the biggest immigration victory that we got under Obama, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, which would give, basically, it just gives like 2-3 year work permits for undocumented folks. That's all it did. Now, the Democrats basically keep talking about how much they gave the immigrant community DACA. And I'm here to tell you that it took a 2-year campaign that included and involved a tremendous amount of nonviolent direct action in order to get DACA. This thing that Obama keeps talking about, like that, he gave us DACA, we had to wrest DACA out of the hands of the Obama administration. And the day that Obama, in fact, pushed for DACA and announced the DACA program, thank you, there were, I had friends who were undocumented activists were engaging in nonviolent sit-ins in Obama campaign offices. And like I said, this was the culmination of a 2-year campaign to try to get the Dems to push for DACA. So just to give you a sense of kind of like, we have always had to push and we've always had to use nonviolent direct action sit-ins, shutting down streets, the biggest, campaign that often doesn't really get as much media attention that I think that it should. I remember those heady days. It was, there was this group of undocumented activists who literally infiltrated detention centers in order to get people out. And mostly younger dreamer type folks who talked about, even as undocumented people, they talked about their privilege compared to other undocumented people, saying that they were more sympathetic, to people back then. And this was 2011, 2012, something like that. I can't quite remember when. But the whole point was that they basically turned themselves over to Border Patrol and ICE. And the idea was to once they were inside the detention centers, they would share the stories of the people on the inside. This was during the Obama administration, and Obama kept talking about how, he was only going after criminals and not going after regular immigrants, which is a refrain which I'm sure you're familiar of when it comes to Trump. We know that in our communities, that's not what happened. And what they were doing was basically sharing the stories of the people on the inside. While they were in the detention centers, they were calling media saying, here's the story of blah, 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 who is blah, 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 who doesn't have a criminal record and blah, blah, blah. It was such a successful campaign that once DHS figured out what they were doing, they literally kicked these undocumented activists out of the jails because they were so embarrassed by all the bad media that was happening. So that just gives you a sense of all of the possibilities that there are. And I know I'm already out of time, but all that is just to give you a glimpse of the sense of, I know that there are a lot of people right now telling you, like, well, we can't pass this legislation, the Republicans hold Congress, and what are we gonna do? There is plenty of time and space to maneuver, including getting involved in nonviolent direct action to keep us from the fascism that we are definitely moving towards. I don't want to sugarcoat it. We are definitely in a terrible historical period, but we're not at the moment of fascism. We're before it, and there's a tremendous amount of time and space for activism to keep us from getting there. And I'm already seeing all sorts of positive signs in terms of the way that the Trump coalition is basically already crumbling right now. So I guess I'll just start with that, and hopefully we'll get into more of a conversation about this. But my biggest thing is, whether it's nonviolent direct action or just joining any particular group, like, there is time and space to fight this. Don't believe all of the messages about how we're paralyzed and Republicans, are a juggernaut. They absolutely are not. Everywhere I turn, there's evidence that these folks are fragile right now. Fragile, which is why I'm so frustrated that the Dems don't know how to message against them. But the point is, there's tremendous amount of power still that we have. So to start with that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Howard. I also go by Howie. That's my nickname. You can call me either Sarah or Howie. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as a white settler-descended person. I also identify as queer and gender non-binary, as class privileged and educationally privileged, as a citizen. And I'm taking a moment to name all of those identities because all of those identities have really shaped my own personal experience in social movements, broadly speaking, but especially in nonviolent direct action. And I think it's really important, and the other speakers have already referenced this, but it's very important to think about your own positionality when entering into nonviolent direct action, either as a participant or someone helping to plan an action. So I did want to take a moment just to share those aspects of who I am. And before I share more about my experience and my thoughts on nonviolent direct action, I did just want to say it's such an honor to be part of this panel. I've learned a lot just from listening to Andy and Ellen and Aly, and I know that I always learn from Jonathan. So it's truly an honor, and it's also very heartening to see all of you here, and really appreciate the incredible turnout and the interest in this conversation, and very grateful to have this opportunity to be here with you all. One other tiny thing I'm going to mention, I was getting a migraine when I walked in here, and the lights and the mic reverb are making that worse, and so if I very suddenly sit down, it's because I feel kind of dizzy. I'm not going to pass out on you all, I promise, but if I sit down, that's why. So a little bit more about me and how I relate to nonviolent direct action today and in the past. I today work for both SUNY ESF for the College of Environmental Science and Forestry as the student coordinator for the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. and have the honor and privilege of serving as the staff advisor to a group called 315 Students for Liberation, which has been doing incredible Palestine liberation organizing on campus. Jonathan is also part of our group. And I'm really honored to be able to support the students in incredible campus organizing. I also work for the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, organizing allies to take action in solidarity with the nation's struggle to stop the Western New York Stamp mega industrial site from being constructed on the nation's reservation territory border. If you want to talk to me about Stop Stamp, I talk about it whenever I have the chance. This is not really relevant in that the nation has chosen not to pursue direct action. I'm happy to speak about that in the Q&A later as to why that hasn't been considered part of a strategic plan of action at the moment. I also organize locally with JVP Syracuse, and we've taken part in some limited direct actions. I'm looking at Andy, yeah. But that also has not been a huge part of our focus. Maybe that will change moving forward. I grew up in New Jersey with parents who had extensive movement experience. My dad was involved in civil rights movement organizing and later in anti-apartheid movement organizing, especially in a campus context. My mom was very involved in anti-Vietnam War organizing and later in anti-nuke organizing. I grew up going to protests, demos. That's always been part of my life and how I orient myself in the world. I think I took part in my first nonviolent direct action when I was about 10 or 11, and I started refusing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And then I was very involved in free speech and anti-war organizing as a high school student and as a college student. The bulk of my nonviolent direct action experience, though, came when I was living for 10 years after college in Louisiana. I was in New Orleans for most of that time. And I organized non-professionally, so not as paid work, with the Congress of Day Laborers and had the privilege of being able to take action in solidarity with really incredible migrant justice organizing. The city of New Orleans, and specifically the police department of New Orleans, really likes to arrest Black and brown folks for low-level misdemeanors, but they don't like to arrest activists engaging in nonviolent direct action. So there was a lot of ticketing and what's called catch and release, where basically the action organizers come to an agreement with the police that they're going to do a performative arrest, but then they release everybody when the media isn't looking. So that was a lot of my experience for about the first 7 to 8 years that I was living there. And I had the honor of learning from folks who are deeply immersed in immigrant justice organizing and had been in New Orleans and nationally and even internationally, also from folks who had been involved in really powerful civil rights movement organizing in the city dating back to the 60s and the 70s. So those were tremendous learning experiences. And I felt pretty confident. I felt like I knew what I was doing in the direct action space. And so I took a job working as the campaign organizer for the No Bayou Bridge Pipeline campaign, working for an organization called the Louisiana Bucket Brigade. Has anyone heard of No Bayou Bridge Pipeline campaign? So Bayou Bridge was the last leg of the Dakota Access Pipeline. I'm imagining more people have heard about Dakota Access and the struggle at Standing Rock. So that pipeline extended all the way to the Gulf South, extended across much of Louisiana. And I was very lucky to have this role supporting a direct action campaign. And there were other aspects of the campaign, but a lot of it was direct action. And the campaign was an intersectional environmental justice struggle co-led by Black and Indigenous folks. It was a very powerful movement, and it was really transformative for me to be involved in that. I will just be honest, I was in really over my head with the level of escalation of a lot of the actions that we took. And I came away from that experience feeling, I would say, a certain reverence for the role of nonviolent direct action in social movements, in social change movements, feeling that Nonviolent direct action can be incredibly powerful and transformative for individuals and for groups, and it can also have a lot of consequences, especially differential consequences for folks of marginalized identities, and that it is incredibly important to approach any nonviolent direct action with care and intention about those potential consequences and the ways that being part of an action can be, again, both positive and transformative, but also can create harm, including harm in the moment, violent repercussions, but also lasting harm and professional consequences. And I'm gonna pause myself and say, it is not always possible to anticipate what the consequences of an action are, and I'll just give a funny example from my own life. So I've been arrested a number of times, I see that. They were all planned except for one time, and it was in the context of Mardi Gras. So I said earlier, New Orleans cops don't arrest people for taking part in direct action, or it's very hard to get them to do that. The exception is Mardi Gras. I interrupted a parade route and I got tackled by like 5 armed guys. It's funny now, it was not funny at the time. It was actually a really scary experience, but I got tackled and cuffed in front of thousands of people who were cheering. I was also dressed as a giant carrot. They ticketed me and they never filed the charges. I sat in a cop car for many hours. That was kind of the worst of it, but it was really scary and it was totally unintended. I thought that it was sort of a joke action, and it wasn't. But just to wrap up for now, and I hope we can continue this conversation in the Q&A. I think that, yeah, like I said, direct action can be incredibly powerful. It can draw media attention, and particularly the campaign that I helped to coordinate in Louisiana had phenomenal art, like really incredible artwork, and a lot of very creative actions, like people locked down in giant crawfish boil pots on work sites. And that got really good media coverage and helped to bring people into the struggle, helped to make it feel very inviting, helped to make it feel, in the words of Tony Cade Bambara, that the movement was irresistible. I think that action planning can, when done well, can build trust and relationships that long outlast the actions and really lead to incredible cross-coalitional relationship building. Folks have already spoken about the importance of community and supporting actions. I think actions can also build community. And I think it's really important that there's intentionality around planning, particularly, like I said, about ways that folks with already marginalized identities and folks who are already disempowered. Oh. All right. I wondered if that was a sign to.
Actually, just a second. It's possible that Howie is not the only person that's feeling oppressed by the level of light. These switches are a little bit random, so I have to warn you. And I'm going to see if I can lower it just a little bit.
Well,
Thanks so much.
You can also plug in these lights. They're over there. I know how to do it. You follow the cord.
All right, I'm going to keep talking so that we don't get too far behind. Thank you so much. That makes an immediate difference. So I think it's really important that there's, like I said, intentional planning, that there's also intentional training and preparation, and really excellent systems of communication and action agreements before folks are taking particularly any kind of escalated or higher level risk action. I think it's also really, really important that people involved in planning and action are talking very honestly about the strategic value of any action. I was involved in supporting a lot of actions in South Louisiana that honestly, I came to question the actual strategic value of the resources put into making those actions happen and supporting the aftermath of the action. And there I'm talking about things like bail funds, jail support, long-term court costs. So those resources that were being used, that were being expended to make the action happen versus the actual strategic value of the actions happening. And those are really nuanced conversations. I'm not trying to give any kind of rules of thumb there. I just think it's incredibly important that that conversation happens before an action moves forward. And then I think it's really important that there are good systems in place to support people leading up to the actions. I already said training and preparation. That there are also really good support systems of people who are not involved in the action. So there are roles for everyone in this room in supporting an action. You do not have to be there on the front lines. You can do media support, you can do jail support, you can help with legal support, and those roles are as important, if not more important, than the people who are actually risking arrest. And I would say without robust support teams, a group should not be engaging in direct action. I think that can really cause lasting harm and undermine group trust and undermine any of the potential positive outcomes of groups taking action together. So it's really important to have a robust infrastructure to support actions. And then I just strongly believe in post-care debriefing, processing the experience, and ensuring that there's that isn't just a one-time like 15-minute debrief, but that there's ongoing space to process. Again, I think participating in actions have been some of the most impactful experiences of my life, and also the conversations that I've had with people in the aftermath of those actions, including right after and then a couple weeks out, a couple months out, even a couple years out, have been really critical in how I understand those experiences and make sense of them. And that's where a lot of the most powerful transformation has happened for me personally, and where I've seen it for the group. And so I think that having those kinds of systems already set up when you as part of the action planning process is incredibly important. And I'll stop there. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to your stuff.
My name is Jonathan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Palestinian American, come from a Palestinian Christian family on my mother's side, and a white American Mennonite family on my father's side. My father's in the audience today. I'm really honored to have the opportunity to share with you all this evening. I'm going to focus on the Palestinian struggle for freedom. And I think it's actually very instructive and helpful for this group because it is in many ways at the front lines of the repression of nonviolent direct action in these days. It's something that we all need to be watching out for. But I want to ground us in this idea of what nonviolent direct action is. I think that Andy gave us a really helpful definition. But that definition encompasses literally hundreds of tactics, probably uncountable tactics that people can use. Michael Beer, who's a nonviolence theorist, has come up with a list of 365, one for every day of the year, of these tactics, of these technologies to create change and to disrupt violent systems. And the vast majority of these tactics were created by people of color and by marginalized communities. So when you are participating in nonviolent direct action and nonviolent resistance, you are participating in solidarity with and using the technology of people of color and marginalized communities. And those communities often do not get the kind of response that white folks get to direct actions. They don't get the benefit of the doubt of it even being called nonviolent. And this is certainly true with Palestinians. I think of the first Intifada, which was by and large a mass nonviolent campaign. You had strikes, you had boycotts, you had civil disobedience, non-cooperation, political symbolism, massive mutual aid networks created as a form of resistance, but most of what people in the US heard about was violent Palestinians, right? Ignoring the violence of the Israeli occupation and the system of apartheid that had been placed upon Palestinians through colonization. And the labeling of Palestinians as violent is similar to the labeling of Black folks as violent, who resist police brutality, who resist redlining, who have resisted in so many different ways. Because it's easy to go after people of color first and to go after marginalized communities first, to go after unpopular campaigns first. And that's what we see happening in the US right now around Palestine. Not only was the first Intifada a nonviolent demonstration, but Palestinian civil society has called for the last over a decade for one of the largest nonviolent direct action campaigns internationally, asking for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions of Israel until it ends its occupation, until it respects international law with regard to the return of refugees, and until everyone between the Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea is treated with equality. How has that call for nonviolent direct action been received in the US? 38 states, including this one, have made that illegal to participate in. Now, it's not really illegal because you can get around the laws, and the laws are clearly unconstitutional, so they wrote them in such a way that they can never actually be implemented because then they'd be struck down. Instead, it's done as a chilling effect to make us not participate. Because when we hear something's illegal, we think it's something bad. And of course, when I say this, I'm saying that our right to boycott, a form of nonviolent resistance that has been used in almost every successful nonviolent campaign in the last 100 years, is under threat. Yep. And they did it because Palestinians were unpopular. And they could get this law through by saying it's targeting Palestinians, but it affects any of us that want to use that. Actually, the laws that were used to make the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement illegal literally have been carbon copied by the fossil fuel industry to make boycotting fossil fuels illegal, by the gun industry to make boycotts of guns illegal. This is a tactic that was first used against Palestinians and is now being used against everyone. And we're seeing that move even more rapidly now under the Trump administration. The Heritage Foundation, who wrote Project 2025, who here has heard of Project 2025? Yeah, they wrote an addendum called Project Esther. Who's heard of Project Esther? Wow, a lot less hands. So Project Esther was written by right-wing Christian nationalists that are part of the Heritage Foundation. And it's supposedly to fight anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
It does not say a word about anti-Semitism, doesn't even identify the term. Goes straight into calling anyone who supports Palestinian rights part of a Hamas support network, claiming that they are supporting terrorism and saying that the federal government should use anti-terrorism laws, should use immigration laws, and should use racketeering laws to make any connection to Palestine solidarity illegal, put people in jail, or deport people who are participating in this. The Trump administration already has a list of Palestine activists on college campuses who could potentially be deported, including someone here in Syracuse. Now, part of what the Heritage Foundation is doing here is that they want to claim that anyone who is participating in Palestine solidarity, they want that to be the definition of anti-Semitism. And there's an even deeper and more nefarious reason for this, and that is because by claiming that someone who supports the state of Israel is protected by anti-discrimination laws, right? So if being against Israel as a form of anti-Semitism, then anyone who supports Israel is protected under what's called Title VI. And the federal government can defund any institution that does not comply with that. So they are finding a way to defund most colleges if they want to, by claiming that there are people who support Palestine on those campuses. Super nefarious. Now, what did college campus administrators do to try to block this? Nothing. Most of them actually complied in advance by changing their definition of anti-Semitism to include Palestine solidarity. Just skidding the rails for the Trump administration to take away more of our civil rights. And so we're seeing this through the limiting of our freedom of speech or freedom of assembly, the right to boycott, academic freedom, and even the ability for our organizations to exist and to collect funds. So many organizations that we love have 501c3 status. Who here heard about the organization, the NGO killer bill? A few folks. So this was brought up by right-wing activists while Biden was still in office, and it was claimed to be to crack down on Palestine organizing by allowing one person in the administration to cut off 501c3 status, charitable status, of any organization without due process. The majority of Democrats agreed with it at the time. It was getting fast-tracked through Congress, and there was very little response from most NGOs, except those who cared about Palestine. When Trump got elected, and those who had been fighting it from the Palestine movement finally got word out to everyone else, you're going to be affected by this too, because now Trump's person is going to be deciding who gets funded or who can get charitable status and who can't. Finally, we got a majority of organizations fighting back on this, and almost every single Democrat, all but 10 were for this, flipped on it. So that's an example of how organizing is important, how solidarity between issues is important, and how watch what they're doing to movements that you're not a part of right now. Watch what they're doing to movements that aren't popular, because they're going to use it to go after you too. Thank you.
So before we go into the question and answer time, we thought a little music would be good to build some energy, right? The civil rights movement used song and music as a way to build solidarity and energy and courage. So Mayor Sponchev is going to lead us in the song.
Thank you to the panel. It was amazing, and thanks to Andy. And yes, civil rights movement and all social movements have used music to galvanize people, to encourage them. It synchronizes our nervous systems. It gives us energy. And I want to say one thing before we sing, which is that we need every voice. And I say that very specifically and politically, because the forces of oppression would like nothing more than for you to be silent. And so I want you to turn right now to every person next to you and say, we need your voice. All right. All right. So don't let anybody ever shame you into telling you your voice isn't the right voice, right? A lot of us have been silenced by being told we shouldn't sing, couldn't sing, etc. And that's a way to silence us. So I want us to be loud, proud, and assertive in our singing. So we're going to sing a song that was a part of the civil rights movement, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. And then it's a zipper song, so I'm gonna throw in some things that we're not gonna let turn us around, because there's a lot of efforts to turn us around and to silence us. So, y'all willing to sing? All right. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let Nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. You can stand if you want. Ain't gonna let fascism turn me around. Turn me around, clapping's good. Turn me around, ain't gonna let fascism turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Good. How about racism? I'm gonna let racism turn me around, turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let racism turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. What else? Give me a word. Sexism. Ain't gonna let sexism turn me around. Let's get more marching. Turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let sexism turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom. How about transphobia? Ain't gonna let transphobia turn me around, turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let transphobia turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. How about xenophobia, the fear of strangers? Ain't gonna let xenophobia turn me around, turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let xenophobia turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Once more with nobody, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Woo!
But before we open it up for question and answer, want to remind folks, Peter talked a little bit about the beginning that this is kind of a first program in a series of efforts to sort of learn together, train together, to plan together for nonviolent direct action. And so the next piece is going to be a more of a training, a hands-on kind of workshop about de-escalating conflict. Kind of Peter spoke to it a little bit, and that's going to be on Wednesday, the 19th of March at 6 o'clock right here. And we will ask people to pre-register for that so that we can get a sense of numbers to plan for it. And you'll get it in the newsletter that Peter talked about earlier. There's also plans for a training for people to serve as legal observers for protests that the New York Civil Liberties Union is going to help us out with. There may be some other additional ones, and then a longer kind of training for nonviolent action that gets at some of the things that various people talked about, but particularly Howie talked about in more detail. And again, pay attention to the newsletter, get involved, take action. So, questions from folks to any of us. Also, we don't want people to do a 15-minute speech, but if you just want to make a statement that's not a question, that's a short one, go for that too. We don't hold all the knowledge up here. So the question is, where can people find the 365 tactics? So
say the link so that we can all have it.
Sorry. Nonviolence International is the organization that put out the link. So I think it's nonviolenceinternational.org/tactics, or just Google that.
As long as Jonathan mentioned Michael Beers, I believe a lot of his work builds on the work of Gene Sharp, who was an early theoretician who I think had 190 methods, so it's expanded, right? And the idea of 365, one for every day of the year, is brilliant. So, other questions?
Question for Ellen. How can we be supportive for you on Wednesday? Could you tell us something about the way in which we might participate, or whatever, if we were there for you when you're on trial?
Thank you. So we'll do a vigil at 9:30 in the morning before we go into the courthouse. And I don't know how big the courtroom is. I don't think it's that big, but I don't know. And if you're able, great, come in. And I feel like what I want to say is 9 of us walked into that lobby that day. I just happened to be the only one who was charged. And so it's a community effort. And I feel like I need the community to be with me because I don't like it, even though I might have been, I've been part of it forever. And then the other piece is that it's a place for all of us to learn how to face a situation. A federal court is intimidating. It's made to be intimidating. And it's partly why I'm pushing myself on this. And so come, if you've never seen a trial, I recommend coming to see what it's like. And also what I want to say is I'm a mom of 4 kids. I have grandchildren. I want to work in my garden. Yes, my whole life has been sort of about this, but I'm also not like a scholar who's read all of Gene Sharp. I have not. But so what I want to say is it's for everyone. It's for everyone. And so I think to go into court is to come and learn as part of it along with me. Thanks.
Where will it be?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's at the federal building downtown, and I don't know the street name. It's West Clinton Street, the Syracuse Federal Building.
There's a flyer circulating that has information with logistics. I can't remember if I saw it go out on the CNY Solidarity list, but it was circulating today.
Carol Baum did that?
I'm not sure, but are you, do you have to have those new New York State licenses to be able to get into the federal building? For those of us who've been holding off on them.
I don't know, because actually, when I usually go, they usually say, no, you can't come in, and you can't talk to representatives. But then when I went the other day, I was like, oh, I have court, and then they let me go in. So usually I'm the public, and I want to go in. Anyway,
sure.
Sorry, I don't know the answer.
You have to have a reason to go in these days.
Yeah. But if you're going to the trial.
You might be able to go in. I'm not sure everybody else.
Yeah. So, yeah. They should be, it's supposed to be.
So when you're arrested in the United States, you still are supposed to have the right to a public trial. So if you go to the federal building and they say you don't have the right, we encourage you to assert that right. But one of the things that many people are saying right now is that one of the ways that that Trump will succeed is if we cede our power to him. If we don't assert our rights and say, no, we have the right to this. And doing that in all kinds of situations is good sort of practice to build up to if you want to engage in more specific kinds of nonviolent direct action. Because there's all kinds of ways that despite us being people talk about, this is the greatest democracy in the United States. Yet there's this really clear message that I think all of us have heard, which is kind of don't fight City Hall, don't speak up, don't make a fuss, right? Democracy should be about making a fuss, about standing up, about living your truth and expressing it. So that's what we have to do.
Thank you for saying that. And so what I want to say to that is, I'll talk with some of this for people that are coming with me, and I will ask them to be paying attention in the lobby and get the word upstairs if people are being turned away, and so that I can say something to the judge about it. Because every step of the way, don't cede power.
Last week's newsletter says Wednesday, February 26th at 9:30 a.m. at the federal building for a vigil before Ellen's hearing. So If you signed up for newsletter, we probably won't get you on before tomorrow morning, but you can go on to the website and look at the newsletter anytime. So tomorrow it will appear there by tomorrow afternoon.
Other questions?
I'm not so sure how to form this question, and I don't want to insult anyone. There are a lot of issues that have been addressed tonight. I gotta read my note, I'm old. But we have a lot of things that we protest in this country. Gaza, Palestine, immigrants, transgender athletes, abortion. I have looked at all these issues as spoke strings that very clever politicians are throwing up to get us to not watch what, in my honest opinion, is really happening, and that's the destruction of our Constitution, of our form of government. If we splinter into standing up for all these other issues, which I understand are issues, and I'm not saying they're not important. But it seems to me we could have a louder voice if we're all singing out and saying we got to protect our Constitution someday.
Did people hear the question, or should I try to summarize it? People heard it?
Okay, so I mean, what I would say, first of all, is I don't know about the framing of defending the Constitution, and that's just because I'm a radical lefty. This might be a minority opinion. I think that the Constitution itself needs critique. That being said, I do believe that the substance of what you're saying is absolutely correct, which is that, all of these attacks are part of eroding the institutions that make up US democracy. My sense from the people here, some of whom I've organized or some of whom I have, admired and checked out their work is, these are not like just siloed activists who only think about their issues. They clearly see how our issues are connected and are connected to those broader issues. Like, I focus on immigration, but I could definitely have a long conversation on how it connects to prisons, how it connects to money in Washington and DC, how it connects to Palestine, how it connects to environmental rights. Any activist organizer like worth their salt is already making those connections. I do believe that that is the work, though. What you're saying is absolutely correct. If anything, we need to have more cross-movement organizing. For a while, as a Black person, for example, I did a bunch of organizing with Black Lives Matter, the National Movement, and BLM Syracuse. To me, I couldn't see the separation between immigration work and the racial justice work that I ended up doing. Those things are just deeply connected. So far from insulting anyone or pushing anyone, I would say that you are absolutely correct. Yeah, that's what needs to happen. We need to connect these issues because all of those issues are connected to the way in which our rights can be eroded and how all of these institutions can be eventually destroyed. When I saw MAGA coming, I wasn't just thinking to myself, oh my God, as an immigrant, I'm in trouble. I absolutely saw the panoply of issues that we were going to be dealing with that affected not just immigrants, but obviously US citizens of all stripes. And one of the things that makes me really sad is that for a lot of us who are immigrants, we've been in a precarious situation for a long time. We're kind of weirdly used to it. What makes me sad is that more and more US citizens are in this precarious situation now. And we can't afford to think of these issues as separated. So yeah, I'm just in some ways really affirming what you just said.
Quick response from CNY Solidarity point of view. You're right, there are too many issues for us to address all of them. Our response, inadequate though it is to try to work largely with other organizations in the community. And we ask our members about once a year, are we getting it right? One of the things that we do is work very closely with organizations like Syracuse Peace Council, New York Civil Liberties Union, Families for Lead Freedom, Central New York Worker Center, Urban Jobs Task Force, We support most of them with regular donations and also with showing up when they need us there at the Common Council chamber, in front of City Hall, by making phone calls, things like that. So there's a lot more to your question, but that's kind of the beginnings of how we try to approach it.
Other questions? Okay. Julie and then Mary.
Yeah, I'm interested in some of the ways that we can do resistance work, sort of with combining individual actions with community and being organized. So I'm wondering if anyone can talk to, well, maybe Jonathan, about how we can do PDFs in our local community, I guess. And the one that I see is similar, but no one else may, is tax resistance. Is I know that War Resisters League does sort of community, pulls people together into communities to resist paying taxes, and so do Quakers, the Friends. But I wonder if anything's going on like that, or could be here in Syracuse.
Well, let me just say a few things, and I think, both my refusal to register for the draft, which was a very individual, solitary act, and Aly's coming out as undocumented, but in both cases, we organized with people in our communities so that it was part of it was movement building work, so that we, in my case, I was the one alone in front of the judges. Ellen will be on Wednesday. I was the one sentenced to prison, but there were hundreds of people participating. There were actions in solidarity. When I was sentenced, the day I was sentenced, there were 2 civil disobedience actions in different parts of the federal building of other people saying that, yes, you're singling out Andy because you refused to register, but we oppose war. We resist war in similar ways. We, again, the day I was sentenced, there was a young man who was a Cornell student who publicly declared his refusal to register, connected with the organizing work. So I think those individual actions can be very important, but we need to sort of organize in ways that people are not alone, that both we don't feel alone, as both Howie and Ellen talked about, and Aly as well, but also that we use them to try and build our movement work and encourage other people to think about, right? Most of the other people involved in supporting my case weren't subject to draft registration. They didn't have the possibility to do what I was doing, but that didn't mean that there's not lots of other ways in their own lives that they can non-cooperate with war and oppression.
Yeah, thanks for the question about, I'll take it to be about campaigns, right? Nonviolent direct action is at its most powerful when it's a strategic part of a well thought out campaign, right? Rather than just doing an action here and there, responsively, actually being part of something bigger. And some of the campaigns going on around Palestine right now. One is the Breaking the Bonds campaign that Howie could potentially talk more about, of pushing the city to stop buying Israel bonds that are supporting the genocide in Palestine, and to do that as part of multiple cities that are doing this. And then the other is the Not on Our Dime campaign, which is one that is being done throughout New York State, to make it so that organizations cannot claim charitable status if they are supporting Israeli war crimes. Particularly, there are organizations right now that are giving money to violent Israeli settlers that have been well documented, that have been challenged in court, but the Attorney General of New York has not done anything about these, what should be illegal charities. And in that campaign, there was mass demonstrations, and also there was an inside game part where there was a supportive assembly member who's part of DSA, Zahran Mamdani, who's also running for mayor in New York City, if you know anyone who's voting there. And he actually came up with a legislative tool, with a bill that is he brought into session. So now we can push our state assembly members and state senators, including Rachel May, to sign on to this bill. So we actually have something to rally around. And that's one of the ways where being part of the campaign can make our individual or our direct actions more powerful.
And I hadn't planned to talk about Break the Bonds New York State. We're actually about to launch publicly, but aren't fully launched. But I will now that it's been brought up. So this is very much, this is a national campaign. There is actually many different organizations working to move towards the divestment of US institutions from Israel bonds, which is a massive financial support for the occupier state of Israel. And here in New York State, our common retirement fund is invested at the amount of over $300 million. So it is the largest single state treasury investment in the United States in Israel bonds. And those decisions are made very explicitly by our comptroller, who is a Democrat, Tom DiNapoli. He's also an avowed Zionist. He has made public statements to the effect that he recognizes that these are not the most lucrative investments that he could make, but he's doing it for moral reasons of supporting ideological reasons of supporting the Zionist state. And there is an active campaign in New York State, Break the Bonds New York State, and like I said, we haven't actually launched publicly yet, but if you're interested, come talk to me and I will get you connected. And that's primarily being led by JVP chapters and now also by DSA chapters around the state. More than 300 million. He keeps buying more, so it's hard to keep track. Yeah.
So I realized that none of us responded to the war tax resistance piece. So there's a group called the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee that you can find online that does a lot of that work. I was a war tax resistor for many decades and stopped doing that several years ago for two reasons. One was that my son was preparing to go to college and we could not figure out any way that I could continue to refuse to pay taxes and he could qualify for financial aid for college. And the other was that there was no community of war tax resistors in my local area at all. So I felt a lot of isolation about it and felt some of what Jonathan was talking about a moment ago about sort of, it didn't feel strategic. It felt like this lone individual stand. And so.
I just wanted to say something that's very obvious, but it was important to me when it was pointed out to me. It's kind of reference to how many issues are on the table, and it's overwhelming, right? Oh my God, immigrant rights, education system, protect the climate, anti-nuke, trans issues, and it wasn't until I realized that overwhelming us was the point. So that we would go, oh my God, oh no, what? So we would be so overwhelmed and despondent that we'd go under the covers and say, what can you do? So what was said to me, which I think is important, is choose something that you care about. If everybody in this room took the thing that we are most passionate about, you cannot do all of them. You just can't. There aren't enough hours in the day. But if each person said to me, immigrant rights, I'm going to work around Gaza. I'm going to work on anti-nuke stuff. I'm going to work on women's right to choose. I'm going to write protecting trans youth. If everyone did something, we'd be so far ahead and we wouldn't feel so scattered and we'd be able to feel more effective and more positive. So figure out what you're passionate about because you'll stick with that. So the song that I've been leading in many settings says, I cannot do all the good that the world needs, but the world needs all the good that I can do. So choose something.
So let's take a few questions all at once. So there's 1, 2, and 3. You already had one, so and we're going to be running out of time. But
Real quick, almost as a surrogate action for not being able to do everything, but this Friday,
remember, the National Economic Blackout now is just supposed to be for DEI. But you know, the people that want to participate, they don't know that. Everybody just wants to do something. And I think what it's saying, I think it's an anti-Trump statement. I think it's a universal statement. So, you know, if you can email a couple hundred people, whatever.
Yes, so don't buy anything on Friday, nothing.
This is more of a question. What Aly mentioned earlier, he found in his remarks places where Trump's regime was kind of crumbling. I'm looking for good news, and I'm looking for ways in which to get involved that somehow would make a difference to me. I'm just wondering, could you share those pieces of vulnerability that scream out at you?
Okay, great. So just in case people didn't hear, wanted some more detail about what Aly referred to earlier as places of vulnerability where there was cracks in the Trump wall. And then there was one other.
I just wanted to shout out whoever does that newsletter that in response to the notion about the print, that's a great way, and that's really the way I look at that every week, and I find that there's something I can do. Thank you to whoever does that, and maybe there's room to expand that with bringing people together.
Okay, so shout out to the newsletter. And I think Peter McCarthy is the main person who does that. Is that right? He's also doing our live streaming here. Sally, frailties. Good news.
Good news. Okay. No, yeah, in terms of Trump, you know, I mean, it's okay. One way of looking at it is, I don't know how many of you know the author and activist in her own right, Naomi Klein. She's written quite a few books, and especially books on what she's termed the shock doctrine, which is the way that capitalists and authoritarians use these crises as a way to gain more power. A couple of weeks ago, she said something that I was paying attention to and that I feel like I'm actually seeing in action right now. She said that, like, yes, these moments of crisis are terrifying, but one of the things that she's found in studying these moments is that sometimes the authoritarians and the fascists like go so far in sort of repression that they actually engender more resistance. That, like, I know that it started with this sense of like, oh, they're throwing out all these executive orders and it's, you know, paralyzing. But now we're getting to the point where they're breaking so much stuff that, like, if you're paying attention to the news, and I'm definitely a news junkie, you can absolutely see the cracks in the Trump coalition happening as we speak. How are you gonna try to fire 250,000 people and not hit MAGA folks? MAGA folks are all over the place. They're starting to come out and saying things like, oh, wait, didn't exactly vote for that. And it even started to, I mean, we're seeing it in terms of the poll numbers. Like by the end of last week, Trump's poll numbers are going down precipitously right now. People are not in favor of this. In fact, in one of the polls, they asked people, what government agency would they want to get defunded, you know, because of what Musk is doing with Doge and everything. The number one answer, this is a national poll, Doge. People want to get rid of Doge. That's the number one thing. Very close to that was Department of Defense. I think that was close to number two. ICE was also very close by. So all that is just giving you this sense, these people are nowhere near as like powerful or popular as they may like you to think. The cracks are happening left and right now. I wish I had written down some of these, not just poll numbers, but also ideologically, the cracks within MAGA are absolutely happening. Because what we're having right now is kind of the populist wing of MAGA, as represented by people like Steve Bannon, at war with Musk, who is the representative of the oligarchy and the sort of like trying to, you know, grab the money for the wealthy. And I'm just like sitting back like, oh, let these people fight. You know, like it's already happening. So, I don't have like a huge list of things, even though honestly, if you give me enough time, it would be pretty easy to find the evidence. But this whole impression that they're like this just popular juggernaut, that there's nothing we can do. What they're doing is so deeply unpopular in terms of dismantling all these institutions. I would even say that the advantage is already in our favor right now if we are willing to act. Because if we don't, they will grab everything. So that's my short answer to that.
So, great, thank you for being here. Thank you for the organizing on campus. I think there's no quick and easy answer, but I think if you want to talk to some of us might be willing to help with some of that. And if there's a particular interest in direct action, maybe to do something similar to this on campus. Because, I think that I'm hopeful that there are many of your fellow students who are deeply upset about what's happening and looking for an outlet to act as is reinforced by the folks showing up here. So before people leave, Peter wants to remind folks about the next meeting. And on behalf of us up here, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to continuing to work with you.
So this was a special training session, first in a series. The next will be March 19th. Check the newsletter. Our next regular meeting of CNY Solidarity will be here at 2 o'clock this Sunday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll follow our 30-60-30 format, 30 minutes for introductions, announcements, possibly a brief presentation from another group, 60 minutes for our committees to meet, Indivisible Onondaga County, State and Local Action Team, Climate Justice, Beyond War and Militism. 3 or 4 of those committees will be meeting, and go to those meetings for an hour. The last half hour, we will hear from those committees about what they're doing. As I said, we'll get you on the newsletter list, probably not tomorrow. You can make those calls every day. There's typically 4 or 6 actions you can take every single day. So if you can make those calls, please do it. Thank you so much for coming. Leave your name tag in the box on the table, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.